The large silver ship hung in Earth's orbit like a polished mirror catching the sun. Inside the United Nations Space Command Center, people rushed around with purpose and excitement. Today was humanity's first official meeting with aliens. Natalie Richards checked her toolkit one more time. As the lead engineer for the welcoming committee, she needed to be ready for anything. Next to her stood Commander Eric Howard, tall and serious in his dress uniform. He kept his eyes on the main screen showing the approaching alien shuttle. "Remember," he said to Natalie and the others, "the Galactic Alliance has strict protocols. Follow my lead and stick to the script." Natalie nodded but continued to organize her tools. She had added a few extras just in case. The shuttle docked with perfect precision at the International Space Station where the first meeting would happen. 6 aliens walked through the airlock. 5 had blue-gray skin with ridge-like patterns on their faces. They wore what looked like military uniforms. The 6th alien was green with large eyes and moved with careful steps. Ambassador Chen stepped forward. "On behalf of Earth, welcome to humanity's home." The tallest alien nodded stiffly. "I am Admiral Krelvox of the Zorvaxian Fleet, representing the Galactic Alliance Military Council. We appreciate your welcome." The green alien spoke in a softer voice. "And I am Representative Tolmar of the Pelleran Republic, here as diplomatic liaison." Introductions continued around the room. When they reached Natalie, Admiral Krelvox barely looked at her after hearing she was an engineer. His eyes moved quickly to Commander Howard and the security team. "Your military personnel seem adequate," the Admiral said. "Tell me about your weapon systems and defense capabilities." Representative Tolmar made a small gesture. "Perhaps we should begin with diplomatic matters before military assessments." The tour of the space station began. Natalie walked near the back, watching the aliens closely. The Zorvaxians seemed most interested in the command center and weapon systems. They asked detailed questions about chain of command and response protocols. When they reached the engineering section, Natalie stepped forward. "This is where we maintain life support, power, and other critical systems." Admiral Krelvox glanced around the room without interest. "Very primitive. You still use physical repairs rather than automated quantum restoration?" Natalie smiled politely. "We find hands-on solutions work best for our needs." The Admiral made a noise that might have been a laugh. "Hands-on. Yes, your species is still very manual." The tour continued to the research labs. Dr. Greg Martinez demonstrated their latest work on gravity manipulation. As he activated the test chamber, a warning light flashed on the control panel. "That's odd," Dr. Martinez said, tapping the screen. "The system shows an unexpected power surge." Before anyone could react, a loud boom shook the station. The lights flickered and went out. Emergency lights came on, bathing everything in red. "Station breach in Section 7. A voice called over the intercom. "Coolant system failure spreading to adjacent sections." Commander Howard immediately took charge. "Everyone remain calm. Security team, escort our guests to the emergency shuttles according to evacuation protocol." "The breach is between us and the escape shuttles," someone reported. Natalie pushed forward to a nearby terminal. "The main coolant line ruptured. The automated systems are failing to contain it. At this rate, we'll have cascading failures across the station in minutes." Admiral Krelvox turned to his team. "Our shuttle has superior containment fields. We must return to it immediately." "We can't," Natalie said, already pulling tools from her belt. "The breach is blocking the direct route, and going around will take too long." She pointed to a station diagram. "The coolant is spreading too fast." Commander Howard followed protocol. "Begin full evacuation. All non-essential personnel to emergency pods." But Natalie was already moving toward the problem, not away from it. She grabbed a maintenance panel and pulled it open. "I need to create a bypass before the coolant reaches the oxygen generators." Admiral Krelvox looked confused. "Your maintenance. Drones should handle this. Why is she interfering?" Natalie ignored him, pulling cables and connectors from her toolkit. "Greg, I need your gravity manipulator device, and someone get me the laser cutter from Lab 3. People rushed to help as Natalie Worked. She cut sections of pipe from a nearby water system and connected them with fittings not designed for this purpose. She attached Dr. Martinez's experimental gravity device to the makeshift system. "This isn't in any repair manual," one of the Zorvaxian officers said, watching with growing concern. Natalie worked quickly, sweat beading on her forehead. "The coolant is spreading through the lower circulation system. I'm creating a gravity well to pull it away from critical systems and into this containment field." She connected the final wire and activated the system. The gravity device hummed to life, pulling the escaped coolant up through the pipes she had created. The coolant flowed into an emergency container never meant to hold such material. For several tense minutes, everyone watched as the makeshift system struggled under the pressure. Warning lights continued to flash, but gradually the station's alert level decreased from critical to severe, then to cautionary. "It worked," Dr. Martinez said, checking the monitors. "She redirected the coolant flow and prevented it from reaching the oxygen systems." Commander Howard nodded with approval. "Good work, Richards. Now let's complete the evacuation until proper repairs can be made." As they moved toward the escape pods, Natalie noticed Admiral Krelvox watching her. His expression was difficult to read, but he seemed disturbed. Once they reached safety, the Admiral approached Commander Howard. "Your military response was orderly and predictable, but that engineer—" He glanced at Natalie. "What she did was not standard procedure." "Engineers, like Natalie, often have to improvise," Commander Howard explained. The Admiral's voice lowered. "She used equipment for purposes outside their design parameters. She created a solution that did not previously exist." Tolmar, the green alien, joined them. "I found it quite impressive. Quick thinking saved many lives today." Later, as the human and alien delegations regrouped on a rescue vessel, Natalie overheard Admiral Krelvox speaking quietly to his aide. "Their soldiers follow predictable patterns like any species with military discipline," the Admiral said. "But those engineers, they don't think like any race we've encountered. They do not respect the proper boundaries of technology." His aide looked concerned. "Is that a problem, Admiral?" Admiral Krelvox watched as Natalie helped repair a communication system with parts from an unrelated device. "It could be the greatest problem the Zorvaxian Empire has ever faced. Mark my words. Watch their engineers, not their soldiers. They are the true unpredictable element." Natalie smiled to herself, unaware that her simple act of creative problem-solving had just changed how an entire alien empire viewed humanity, and not necessarily for the better. 6 months passed since the first meeting with the aliens. Life on Earth had changed. New technologies were shared, trade agreements were signed, and humans began to learn about the wider galaxy. But not all was well. Frank Carpenter looked out the window of the Rocky Mountain Research Facility. The morning sky glowed orange instead of blue. Smoke from distant fires blocked the sun. The Zorvaxian Empire had broken away from the Galactic Alliance 3 days ago. Their first act was to attack Earth and other planets that had recently joined the Alliance. "Status report," Frank said to the room of tired engineers and scientists. As the senior engineer, everyone looked to him for guidance. Lisa Brennan, a young engineer with red hair, pointed to a screen showing satellite images. "It's bad. The Zorvaxians hit all major military bases in the first wave. Power grids in most big cities are down. The second wave took out communication centers." Frank nodded. Their research facility was hidden deep in the mountains, built to study alien terraforming technology shared by the friendlier members of the Galactic Alliance. The location had kept them safe so far, but the facility's power signature would eventually give them away. Captain Joe Ramirez, the ranking military officer at the facility, spoke next. "We lost contact with command. We have 30 soldiers here, basic weapons, and enough food for maybe 2 months. Can we call for help?" asked Dr. Yvonne Kelly, the lead scientist. "All standard channels are being watched," said Ramirez. "Any transmission would bring the Zorvaxians right to us." Frank walked to the large machine that took up the center of the main lab. The terraforming device was their main project. Technology that could change air composition, soil chemistry and water properties to make planets more habitable. How close is the nearest Zorvaxian force? Frank asked. Lisa checked another screen. Based on last reports, they have a ground force about 50 miles east. They're sweeping westward, and there's at least one of their ships patrolling this region. Frank placed his hand on the terraforming device. This machine changes atmospheric conditions. What if we use it differently than intended? Dr. Kelly looked concerned. It's designed to make atmospheres breathable over time. It's not a weapon. Not yet, Frank said. But with some changes, maybe it could be. For the next 2 days, the engineers worked around the clock. They modified the terraforming device to work faster and in a more focused area. Instead of slowly changing air composition over miles, it would create a sudden, dramatic change in a small space. Captain Ramirez was skeptical. I don't see how changing the air helps us fight warships. Frank connected 2 tubes that weren't meant to be connected. The Zorvaxian ships use a specific type of engine. They pull in air, superheat it, and use that for thrust in atmosphere. What if the air suddenly becomes something their engines can't handle? On the morning of the 3rd day, their sensors detected multiple Zorvaxian ships approaching. The aliens had found them. They're calling for our surrender, said Lisa, listening to the communication. They say they'll spare us if we give up now. Captain Ramirez checked his weapon. We have 30 soldiers against at least 100 of theirs plus air support. We can fight, but we won't win. We're not fighting the way they expect, Frank said. Everyone to your positions. The engineers activated their modified device as the Zorvaxian ships approached. The machine hummed loudly, using 10 times more power than it was designed for. Outside, the air around the facility began to change. Through cameras, they watched as 5 Zorvaxian ships flew into the affected area. Nothing seemed to happen at first. Then one ship's engines sputtered. Another began to lose altitude. Within minutes, all 5 ships were making emergency landings. It worked, Lisa shouted. The silicon particles we added to the air crystallized in their engines when heated. The ground forces approached more cautiously now. Captain Ramirez positioned his soldiers at key points, but they held their fire. The Zorvaxians tested the air with their equipment before moving forward. Frank watched through binoculars. They're wearing breather masks now. They know something's wrong with the air, but they think it's just dangerous to breathe. The Zorvaxian commander ordered his troops forward. Their vehicles entered the zone affected by the terraforming device. Soon they too began to fail. Engines stopped working. Energy weapons misfired or wouldn't charge. The atmospheric changes are affecting their power cells too, Dr. Kelly said, studying readings on her tablet. The moisture content we added is causing shorts in their systems. With their technology failing, the Zorvaxians retreated. Humans had won their first victory, not through superior firepower, but through creative engineering. That evening, as they monitored for further attacks, Frank intercepted a Zorvaxian communication. He called everyone to listen. The human base in Sector 7 used atmospheric manipulation as a weapon, said a translated voice. All ships and vehicles that entered the affected zone suffered critical failures. Another voice responded, Impossible. Their terraforming technology is not weapons grade. Our engineers confirmed this. They modified it, changed its purpose, used it in ways not intended by design. There was a long pause before the second voice spoke again. This confirms High Command's new assessment. Modify attack protocols immediately. New priority targets are engineers first, soldiers second. Repeat, engineers first, soldiers second. The room fell silent as everyone understood what this meant. The Zorvaxians now feared human engineers more than human fighters. 2 days later, they made contact with other human survivors. Word of their defense spread quickly. Other research facilities began adapting their own technology in unexpected ways. A weather station in Australia used climate monitoring equipment to disrupt Zorvaxian communications. A marine biology lab in Brazil turned ocean current measurement tools into a detection system that found hidden Zorvaxian submarines. As reports came in, Frank realized something important. The aliens had rules for how technology should be used. Humans didn't. To the Zorvaxians, using a device for anything other than its intended purpose was almost unthinkable. To humans, it was just good problem-solving. They think in straight lines, Frank told Lisa as they worked on further improvements to their defenses. We think around corners. That's why they're more afraid of us now. You mean they're more afraid of people like you? Lisa said. Engineers who can turn every day things into something unexpected. Frank shook his head. No, they're afraid of how all humans think, but they're right to be especially worried about engineers. We're just getting started. Across the console, a light blinked. Another Zorvaxian fleet was approaching Earth. The war was far from over, but humanity now had a fighting chance. Not because of their weapons, but because of their minds. 1 year into the war with the Zorvaxians, hope was hard to find. The transport ship, Dauntless, moved slowly through space, trying to avoid detection. Inside, 50 humans sat quietly. They were refugees from a moon base that had been destroyed. Last week, Susan Miller checked her toolkit for the 10th time. As a mechanical engineer, her tools were her most valuable possession. The ship shuddered and the lights flickered. That's not good, she whispered to the man next to her. Before anyone could react, a bright light filled the cabin. When it faded, the humans found themselves unable to move. A paralyzing field held them in place as Zorvaxian soldiers boarded the ship. Remain still, ordered the Zorvaxian commander. Resistance is futile. You are now prisoners of the Zorvaxian Empire. The soldiers moved through the cabin, scanning each human. When they reached Susan, the scanner beeped differently. Engineer, said the soldier. He made a note on his device and moved on. The humans were taken to a large Zorvaxian station orbiting Jupiter. The soldiers were placed in high-security cells with constant monitoring. The engineers, including Susan, were put in a different section, with lower security. Civilians were held in open barrack-style rooms. They think we're less dangerous, whispered Ben Lucas, another engineer, as they were led to their cells. They still don't understand. Susan nodded but said nothing. She had already begun to observe everything around her. The days passed slowly. The prisoners were put to work, sorting through Earth debris that the Zorvaxians collected for study. Susan was assigned to the waste reclamation section, where broken machines and garbage were processed. One day, while sorting through a pile of broken parts, Susan noticed something familiar about the Zorvaxian waste system. It used principles similar to Earth fertilizer factories where she had worked before the war. The system processed waste and extracted useful materials using chemical reactions. That night, in the engineers' common area, Susan found Ben and two other engineers, Jack Winters and Laura Diaz. I found something interesting today, Susan said quietly. Their waste system uses catalytic conversion, just like we do on Earth. So, asked Jack, what good does that do us? Susan leaned closer. The system connects to nearly every part of the station. It's their version of plumbing, and I think we can modify it. Over the next several weeks, the four engineers collected small parts from their work areas. A broken cleaning drone provided servo motors. Kitchen utensils became tools. Pieces of discarded electronics were hidden in their clothes. They worked, in shifts, with one person always keeping watch. In the waste processing room behind a large tank, they slowly built their device. If we adjust the catalyst bed and introduce this metal compound, Susan explained, we can create a reaction that will release hydrogen gas into their atmospheric system. Not enough to explode, Laura added, but enough to affect the gravity, generators in specific sections. And if we time it right, Ben said, we can create a power surge that should open the electronic locks on the detention areas. They worked carefully, testing small parts of their plan when the guards weren't looking. The Zorvaxians never expected their prisoners to understand their technology, let alone modify it. On the 43rd day of captivity, they were ready. Susan's hand trembled as she made the final connection. If this works, she said, we'll have about 10 minutes of chaos before their systems compensate. It's not much time. Jack nodded grimly. It's the only chance we've got. Susan activated the device. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a slight tremor ran through the station. The lights dimmed briefly, A moment later, warning alarms sounded throughout the complex. Over the Yao announcement system, a Zorvaxian voice spoke urgently in their language. The translation system added a human voice underneath. Warning. System malfunction in sections 5 through 9. Gravitational anomalies detected. All personnel report to emergency stations. The prison door locks clicked open. Susan and the others rushed out into the corridor where confused prisoners were already gathering. "Follow us," Susan shouted. "We have a small window of opportunity." In the sections they had targeted, Zorvaxian guards floated helplessly in zero-gravity areas, unable to reach their weapons or communications devices. Other sections had doubled gravity, pinning the aliens to the floor. The freed military prisoners quickly took control, seizing weapons and securing strategic areas. Within the promised 10 minutes, they had control of the detention level. An hour later, they controlled the entire station. In the command center, Captain Nicole Barnes, the highest-ranking military officer among the prisoners, looked over the station schematics. "How did you do this?" she asked Susan. "They have fail-safes and security measures everywhere." Susan pointed to the waste reclamation system on the diagram. "They never thought their plumbing could be a weapon. We used their own system against them." Captain Barnes shook her head in amazement. "While we were planning combat maneuvers and analyzing their security rotations, you engineers were building a station-wide attack using garbage." "Sometimes the best weapon is the one no one sees as a weapon," said Ben. The humans managed to send a message to Earth forces before the Zorvaxians could respond. 3 days later, Alliance ships arrived to secure the station permanently. In the captured Zorvaxian database, they found something disturbing. The Zorvaxians had created detailed files on human behavior and capabilities. Military personnel were categorized by training and equipment, but engineers had special classification markers. Susan translated the file. Human engineers present unique tactical challenges. Unlike other species, humans fail to recognize the concept of impossible. They repurpose technology in ways that violate established engineering principles. Standard containment protocols are insufficient. Another section showed new Zorvaxian military orders. In any engagement with human forces, engineers must be targeted before military personnel. Their unpredictable problem-solving abilities represent a greater long-term threat than conventional human weapons. Captain Barnes read through the files with growing satisfaction. "They're afraid of you," she told Susan. "Not our guns or our ships, but our engineers' minds." As they prepared to return to Earth with the captured station and its valuable intelligence, Susan looked out at the stars. The war was still going badly for humanity overall, but something had changed. The Zorvaxians now knew they weren't just fighting human soldiers, they were fighting human ingenuity. "They should be afraid," Susan said quietly. "We're just getting started." 2 years passed since the war began. Earth looked different now. Many cities lay in ruins. Forests burned. The oceans were patrolled by Zorvaxian ships. But humans still fought back. In what was once Chicago, Director Karen Lewis looked at the map spread across her table. Red markers showed Zorvaxian strongholds. Blue markers showed the few remaining human bases. The blue markers were far fewer than the red. "We can't win with traditional military tactics," she told the room of tired officers and advisors. "We've tried for 2 years. We're outgunned and outnumbered." General Sam Reed nodded grimly. "Our forces are down to 30%. Ammunition is scarce. Fuel is even harder to find." Karen turned to a thin man with glasses sitting quietly in the corner. "Dr. Patel, tell us about your new program." Dr. Nikhil Patel stood up and walked to the front of the room. His hands were stained with grease and his lab coat had burn marks. "After studying our successful operations against the Zorvaxians, we found a pattern," he said. "Our greatest victories came when military units worked directly with engineers, in the field. When soldiers and engineers plan together and solve problems together, they find solutions that neither group would discover alone." He touched a button, and the wall screen showed images of makeshift weapons and modified vehicles. "I propose what we're calling the MacGyver Protocol, named after an old entertainment character known for creative problem-solving. We pair each military unit with at least 2 engineers. We give them basic supplies but no specific instructions. We let them solve problems their own way. General Reed frowned. That goes against all military doctrine. Chain of command exists for a reason. Traditional doctrine isn't working, Karen said firmly. The Zorvaxians understand our military tactics because they think the same way. But they don't understand how our engineers think. That's our advantage. After much debate, the Global Defense Coalition approved the MacGyver Protocol. Within weeks, mixed teams of soldiers and engineers deployed worldwide. Each team had freedom to solve problems however they could. At the lunar colony, things were desperate. Engineer Paul Wilson looked at the damage report on his tablet. The life support system was failing after the last Zorvaxian bombardment. The colony had power for only 3 more days. We can't fix it, said Amy Chen, his assistant. We need parts we don't have. Paul walked through the hydroponics bay where plants grew under special lights. These plants provided both food and oxygen for the colony. The large grow lights hummed with energy. Those lights use a lot of power, Paul said thoughtfully. And they produce a specific wavelength. Sergeant Will Dixon, the military leader assigned to Paul's team, looked confused. What are you thinking? We can't eat the lights. Paul smiled. No, but maybe we can use them differently. He pointed to the mining section of the colony. And those industrial lasers in the mining operation, they're designed to cut through moon rock. Sergeant Dixon's eyes widened as he began to understand. You want to make a weapon. Over the next day, Paul and his team worked non-stop. They removed most of the grow lights from the hydroponics bay. They disconnected the mining lasers from their mounts. Using cables, power converters, and parts from damaged equipment, they built something entirely new on the colony's surface. It's not pretty, Paul admitted as they made final adjustments. But it should work. The device looked like a mess of equipment never meant to be connected. Grow lights were arranged in a circle, focused inward. At the center, the mining lasers were positioned to interact with the light energy. The grow lights create a concentrated energy field, Paul explained to Sergeant Dixon. The mining lasers pass through that field and become amplified. The result should be a directional energy weapon powerful enough to disable Zorvaxian ships. Dixon looked skeptical. Should be? Paul shrugged. Engineering is partly science, partly hope. Their sensor array detected 3 Zorvaxian landing ships, approaching. These ships carried troops to finish destroying the colony. Everyone in position, ordered Sergeant Dixon. The soldiers took cover, weapons ready, though everyone knew their guns would do little against Zorvaxian armor. Paul activated the makeshift weapon system. The grow lights powered up, creating a glowing circle of energy. The mining lasers began to heat up. 10 seconds to full power, Paul called out. 5, 4, 3. The lead Zorvaxian ship came into view, moving toward the colony's main airlock. Fire! Shouted Dixon. Paul pressed the activation switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a blinding beam of energy shot forth from the device. The beam struck the lead ship, cutting through its shields like they weren't there. The ship's engines died immediately. It drifted powerless. The second and third ships changed course, trying to avoid the beam. Paul adjusted the aim, hitting the second ship. It too lost power and drifted away. The third ship fired at the weapon array. Several of the grow lights exploded, but enough remained functional. Paul fired one more time, disabling the third ship before the entire system overloaded and shut down. It worked, cheered Amy. We stopped them. Sergeant Dixon stared at Paul with new respect. You built a military-grade energy weapon out of gardening equipment and mining tools. Paul was already checking the damage to his device. It won't work. Again. Too many components burned out. But it bought us time until help arrives. Help did arrive 3 days later. A human transport ship, protected by 2 captured and modified Zorvaxian fighters, reached the lunar colony. The passengers included engineers with needed supplies. As they repaired the colony's systems, a communication officer approached Paul. We intercepted a Zorvaxian message you should hear, she said, handing him a tablet. Paul listened to the translated message. Their military strategies are understandable, but their engineering solutions defy logical prediction. We cannot defend against what we cannot anticipate. The humans are now using agricultural lighting systems as weapons. They modify mining equipment into defense systems. Every tool in their possession becomes a potential threat. Another voice responded, "How do we combat such unpredictability?" The Imperial Council has approved new tactics. We must destroy all human infrastructure completely. Leave them nothing to repurpose. Every tool, every machine, every power source must be eliminated. Paul turned off the recording. The Zorvaxians were changing their entire strategy because of human engineers. They weren't just targeting military bases anymore. They would destroy everything humans could possibly use to build or create. They're scared of screwdrivers and wrenches now, Sergeant Dixon said with a grim smile. Paul nodded. They should be. This war isn't about who has the biggest guns anymore. It's about who can think differently when everything is falling apart. As the colony's systems came back online, Paul began drawing plans for new defensive measures. The Zorvaxians would return with greater numbers next time, determined to leave nothing behind. But human engineers were already thinking of new impossible solutions. 3 years into the war, humanity faced its darkest hour. The Zorvaxians had destroyed most major cities. Their ships controlled the skies. Their ground forces pushed the remaining humans into smaller and smaller safe zones. But the war was not over yet. Dr. Alan Peterson stood in the hidden bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Around him, 6 other engineers worked at various stations. Maps and diagrams covered the walls. Parts and tools filled every table. "The intelligence is confirmed," said Major Linda Harper, entering the room with a tablet. "The Zorvaxians are bringing their planet-killer weapon, the Stellar Forge, into Earth orbit. They plan to end the war once and for all." Alan studied the images on her tablet. The Stellar Forge was massive, a space station larger than anything humans had ever built. It generated energy on a scale that could crack a planet's crust. "How long do we have?" Alan asked. 3 days, Linda replied. "Maybe 4. Alan turned to his team. "We need a plan. Conventional weapons can't touch that thing. Its shields are too strong." Ryan Foster, a young electronic engineer, pointed to a section of the Stellar Forge diagram. "What about this? It looks like a control system. For calibration." "It is," said Olivia Wright, who specialized in alien technology. "The Stellar Forge needs constant calibration to focus its energy beam. If that system fails, the weapon is useless." Alan nodded slowly as an idea formed. "We don't need to destroy it. We just need to change what it does." For 2 days, the team worked without sleep. They studied every piece of information about Zorvaxian technology. They built small test devices and refined their plan. On the 3rd day, as the Stellar Forge entered Earth orbit, they were ready. Director Karen Lewis looked skeptical as Alan explained the plan. "You want to send a small team to infiltrate the most heavily guarded Zorvaxian weapon in the galaxy?" "Yes," Alan said simply. "We need to get inside to access the calibration systems. Once there, we can modify them." "And if you succeed, what happens?" "If we succeed, the Stellar Forge will still fire. But instead of destroying Earth, it will create a quantum resonance field that affects only Zorvaxian technology." The mission was approved. That night, a small stealth ship carried Alan and 3 other engineers toward the massive Stellar Forge. The ship used technology captured from previous Zorvaxian vessels, allowing them to approach undetected. They boarded through a maintenance airlock. Inside, they moved carefully through service tunnels, avoiding patrols. "Their security focuses on conventional military threats," whispered Olivia as they crawled through a narrow passage. "They expect soldiers with guns, not engineers with screwdrivers." They reached the calibration control room after 2 tense hours. As Olivia had predicted, it was minimally guarded. The Zorvaxians never imagined anyone would target this system rather than the main weapon controls. The engineers worked quickly. They removed panels and accessed the core systems. Using parts from their own equipment, including pieces of their life support packs, they modified the calibration mechanisms. All Zorvaxian technology uses the same quantum timing mechanism, Alan explained as he worked. It's the foundation of everything they build. They never change it because their engineering doctrine says it's perfect. And that's their weakness, Ryan added, connecting a modified circuit. One standard means one potential point of failure. Alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. A voice spoke in the Zorvaxian language, then in translated English. Alert! Earth Defense Forces detected approaching. All personnel to battle stations prepare the Stellar Forge for immediate firing. They're moving faster than we expected, Olivia said, working faster. We need more time. Major Harper's voice came through their communicators. The diversion is working. Our remaining ships are making it look like a desperate last attack. But hurry, you have minutes at most. Alan made the final connections. Done. Now we need to get out of here. They gathered their tools and moved back toward the maintenance tunnels. Before they reached safety, 3 Zorvaxian soldiers appeared in the corridor ahead. Intruders, one shouted, raising his weapon. Ryan threw his toolkit at them. The metal box hit the lead soldier, making him fire wildly. The engineers scattered, running for different tunnels. Alan and Olivia made it to one passage. Ryan and the 4th engineer, Sam Powell, ran another way. Over the communicators, they heard Sam grunt in pain. I'm hit, Sam said. Not bad. Keep going. The station shuddered as the Stellar Forge powered up. Through viewport windows, Alan saw energy building at the weapon's core. We're not going to make it off the station, Olivia said. Alan nodded grimly. I know. Let's find a shielded area and hope our modifications work. They sealed themselves in a maintenance room as the Stellar Forge reached full power. The station vibrated around them. Firing sequence initiated, announced the Zorvaxian system. A blinding light filled every window as the Stellar Forge fired at Earth, but instead of a destructive beam, the energy spread in all directions as a wave of quantum disruption. The wave passed harmlessly through Earth but affected every piece of Zorvaxian technology in the solar system. The lights on the station flickered and died. Backup systems failed. Throughout the station, confused shouts in Zorvaxian filled the darkened corridors. In their hiding place, Alan checked his simple mechanical watch. It worked. The quantum resonance targeted their timing mechanism. Every piece of Zorvaxian technology just became useless. Olivia smiled in the emergency light of their human-made flashlight. Good thing we don't rely on quantum timing. 3 hours later, human ships approached the powerless Stellar Forge. The Zorvaxians, unable to use any of their advanced weapons or systems, surrendered. 2 weeks after that, representatives from the Galactic Alliance arrived to negotiate peace. The Zorvaxian Empire had suffered a devastating defeat. Every ship, weapon, and system in the solar system had failed simultaneously. Their mighty armada was now drifting metal. In the peace negotiations on the neutral space station New Geneva, the Galactic Alliance representative observed the proceedings with interest. The Zorvaxians feared your soldiers for their courage, he told Director Lewis afterward, but they surrendered because of your engineers. Throughout the galaxy, the most terrifying human phrase is not "we attack," but rather "I can fix that." New protocols were established for integrating human engineers into the Galactic Alliance Defense Forces. At the same time, strict guidelines were created for what human engineers were permitted to modify. The Zorvaxian Empire, once the most feared military power in the galaxy, now maintained a special diplomatic rule. Any station, ship, or planet hosting human engineers must announce their presence in advance. Dr. Alan Peterson, now an advisor to Earth's new Interstellar Diplomatic Corps, often reflected on the war. In a meeting with new engineer recruits, he summed up what the Mi'Ver galaxy had learned about humans. They expected us to fight like soldiers with guns and ships and traditional tactics. What they never understood was that humanity's greatest weapon was never our military might. It was our refusal to accept limitations when facing a problem. That's why engineers are dreaded more than soldiers, because we don't just use weapons. We see possibilities where others see only rules.